Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Atlantic Sound podcast. Today we have, I think, an awesome episode for you. And more than that, we prepared something that is critical, in fact, to understand or in understanding Beethoven, and more especially the tempo in which Beethoven's music, I think, should be played in his own mind, because that's what we're talking about. We don't tell anyone what he or she should do. It's just to search for like what actually had the man in mind when he composed its great works that he did. And today we have like one of these important pieces of the puzzle for you that we're going to display and lay out in detail, which is the Maelzel Canon. Some of you will have heard me talking about that, but we're going to go much more in depth today. We're going to talk about Anton Schindler, yes, the famous forger who destroyed Beethoven's legacy, apparently, when we have to believe the musicologists that talked about him the last decades. We're going to correct that image a little bit, also based on other works of other musicologists. And then we dive into the Maelzel Canon itself, why it is so important for Beethoven's understanding of Beethoven's music, what the secret is, so to say, that is hidden in that. And it's actually not a secret, it's just in plain sight. Everybody can read it, but sometimes you have to do a little bit reading from a certain perspective in order to see things that others do not see. And that's what we're going to do. And then, of course, we're going to compare the result of it, which is, of course, the Maelzel Canon is taken from the 8 Symphonies Allegretto, where Beethoven imitates the metronome. And so in this episode, you will have also a comparison between our recording, the one that Alberto and I made on fortepiano, available for you if you want, a CD box of 10 CDs. Let's pitch it a little bit here because it's a recording we're so proud of. And we're going to compare that with Gardner's performance, who actually plays this piece, this movement in single beat. So without further ado, Stefan, let's dive into the topic of today, shall we?
What else can I say? You said everything that needed to be said. Yeah, people can find our recordings on Bandcamp if they want to have a listen, and they're also going to get it at the very end. So yeah, I mean, let's just dive into it. And maybe before we get into the source itself of the Maelzel Canon, by the way, quick question: which was first, Eighth Symphony, second movement, or Maelzel Canon? Because now you said it like it's the Eighth Symphony was first, and then the Maelzel Canon emerged, or was it the other way around? Because I remember it being the other way around, if I'm honest, but I don't know which is true. Do we know that what was first?
Well, the Maelzel Canon, according to Schindler, he's corrected in that, and I think rightfully Schindler writes about the Maelzel Canon that Beethoven composed that or just made that canon for Maelzel when he left for London to patent actually his metronome. And people forget that Maelzel and Beethoven were very good friends. They had like a very big issue, I think, with the Wellington Symphony that Maelzel, quoting from memory now, that he took on, that he made like an automatic play around, like a machine, so to say, and he took it to London and he played it there without asking Beethoven. But they reconciled later. But in that time, they were very good friends. So the invention of the metronome didn't happen overnight. Beethoven was part of that. And so apparently, according to Schindler, when Maelzel left to London, he met some friends at Beethoven's place, and Beethoven improvised the canon. He did that a lot. So I think we have like about 300 canons from Beethoven's hand. If you in Beethoven's time and you were like remotely connected to Beethoven, it was like a kind of honor to get one of these. It was kind of tradition. People, Carl Manuel Bach was famous for that as well. And so the canon was like a puzzle. You had a line of music and you had to know where the second voice started and the third. You had to, it's like a puzzle. You had to solve, like a chess puzzle, so to say. And so Schindler describes that Beethoven had the canon and sang it at the piano, and everybody, of course, had a good time. But the manuscript was lost, so we don't have the manuscript from Beethoven. It's was given to Schindler, and the only copy we have is in the publication of Schindler in 1871, in the third edition of his Beethoven biography. So, in that chronology, the Maelzel Canon would have been first because the symphony is a little later. But I mean, that it was something that played in Beethoven's mind was, of course, obvious. And even if Schindler would have invented the entire story, we're going to talk about that, it doesn't change anything of the outcome. That's the point. So it's therefore very important, I think, that we make the case a little bit to restore a little bit Schindler's credibility, or to look at it from a little bit more detailed and perspective, and do not stop talking about him in the black and white. He has his issues for sure, and not only in his legacy, also in his character. It was not an easy person, I can imagine, but there are things that we should not forget, that he actually, many of the Beethoven anecdotes we still have come from Schindler. So there is like this double standard: the things that we don't like, we destroy him for, but the things that we actually really like, and we take him like seriously for. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a real answer to your question, but it's like it's also irrelevant. I mean,
Yeah, in a sense it is, but I just thought it's an interesting part because yeah, I remember now where I heard that, because it's actually written in the biography that from this canon the allegretto emerged. So it
yeah.
was like this canon came first, the allegretto second. Of course, it's completely irrelevant, but it's it's
He
interesting.
misses the date, but because at that
Yeah.
time he describes. I mean, this little part I should have prepared. Wasn't prepared for this question.
Shame on you.
No. I don't remember everything. I mean, I should know the date of the Eighth Symphony, like from memory, and I know it. I mean, but what he misses there is for sure that that Maelzel wasn't in Vienna at the time he is pitching, or he is describing the canon to be composed by Beethoven. And people take that as a major mistake, one of the mistakes that Schindler made purposely. But I mean, he was working on all of this like decades later, huh? So you have to imagine, like, he just missed the date for 1 or 2 years. I mean, what's the matter? And the question is also if he was present. And there we touch like on an element that makes him a little vulnerable. He was like, when Beethoven died, he was there. He was like, I think we owe Schindler that a lot of Beethoven's papers and a lot of his notes and his conversation books, we're going to talk about that in a second, that they were not destroyed at all, was because Schindler took care of them. Nobody cared about Beethoven's legacy. I mean, his apartment was open for a few days. Like, nobody was like guarding his heritage, so to say. And so Schindler took care of that, and a lot of things that people didn't want to buy, because his entire estate was sold for a lot of money, by the way. So his manuscripts, his autographs, the unfinished compositions they went to of course publishers, and they paid a lot of money for that. The instruments here and there, but then like the things that nobody cared about, we cannot imagine that anymore. But the conversation books. So Beethoven made his notes because he didn't hear the conversation. So people that visited him just wrote things down, and so Beethoven could read them and reply to them. Nobody cared, and so Schindler took them. So a lot of things that nobody was interested in, Schindler actually kept for decades. And so a lot of these things that he was annotating from a later perspective, of course, he missed. And there comes also another element, as I said. He had this attitude of saying, like, I'm the only one who knew Beethoven. Nobody knew Beethoven better than I did, and I'm the only person you have to go to if you know. So he made like a kind of business out of that. And in that regard, he was projecting himself to be part of that meeting, but he wasn't. And so he made his position in Beethoven's life bigger than it was. And so
Okay.
that's like the man's character. What can I say?
I mean, we're going to get into that in a second, so that's cool. I just Googled in the background. So the Eighth Symphony apparently was composed in 1812, and he worked on it during the summer, immediately after completing his Seventh Symphony. And it was apparently just completed in 4 months, that Eighth Symphony. So just that we have that date also somewhere in the podcast.
Isn't that really unbelievable?
4 months?
I mean, when Beethoven, I mean, why did not someone there with a lot of money say, listen, I'm going to take care of everything and give you an orchestra and a big hall and a composition room. And the only thing you have to do is write symphonies and piano works and other things you want. No, like 90% of Beethoven's life was dealt with like business or things in court with his nephew. I mean, it's unbelievable how many years of his life were lost to like things. And 4 months, and he writes like one of the most insane pieces of music. Unbelievable. But
That's
that's a
cool. Yeah.
side note.
Yeah. So one side remark before we're gonna jump into Schindler and all the stuff that you already started talking about. Mm, you said that Beethoven was friends with Maelzel, but we also know the story that Beethoven apparently didn't know how to use the metronome. So how does that fit? And again, it brings us back to the question of you have a whole beat puzzle, you have a single beat puzzle, and you have a certain piece of evidence like Beethoven knew Maelzel. That's a fact. That's
Mhm.
something you cannot discuss. So, and then you get into chances or probabilities. It's the more correct word. Like, how probable is it that Beethoven didn't know how to use the metronome if he was friends or he knew the inventor of the metronome? I mean, if you just ignore the fact that he was probably not dumb,
Really?
he probably wasn't. He could compose the Ninth Symphony. That's not a factual argument, but how high is the likelihood that this guy didn't know how to use the metronome if he knew the inventor of the metronome? So, duh. I mean, that's like
The chance was 0.00000%. I mean, if
yeah, negligible. Doesn't exist that
it
probability.
doesn't exist, if he would have lived in that time in the middle of Africa and would receive the metronome by a miracle, some action from heaven that dropped the metronome in the middle of the jungle on his head, he would be able to use it. I mean,
Probably. Yeah.
it's a device that if you put it on 60, it gives a second. I mean,
Wow.
that's
Sounds impressive.
but I mean, and then you would be amazed how many musicians today still think that was the case. And there are
Mm,
several arguments that can be made against that, because if Beethoven's metronome was broken, it's one of the chapters in the book. We're waiting for the database to be filled with data, because that chapter will be actually composed or written by the database. If Beethoven's metronome was broken, then all the metronomes in the 19th century were broken as well, and broken in exactly the same way, because they all have the same um, problem. They all are too fast, and moreover, when Chopin writes like 176 quarter notes for his opus 10 number 1, the first etude in C major, well, that's a normal allegro tempo for Beethoven as well. So how strange is that? They all had the same deviation.
mm,
It's impossible. And of course, Clara Schumann once said that, and on the metronome marks of her husband, like, yeah, but his metronome was broken. And you had different brands at the time. Maelzel was not the only one. Later in the 19th century, very late, I don't remember the date, but I think it's like 1890 or something. Camille Saint-Saëns gave a lecture in the Académie Française, I think, quoting from memory here, where he actually insists of like uniforming actually the metronome. And I had very much big hopes reading something there, but actually he pleads for like only have the Maelzel patent, because you have metronomes in that time that were not so precise or were not so precisely calibrated. But the metronome on
mm.
itself, also Clara Schumann took that statement back later. But of course, you don't hear people talking about that. It's the first part that survives. But the metronome is just like a double weight. You have the rod on, and then the weight on top, and you have the weight down. And so when it pivots, even without a mechanism, it can only operate in the speed that these double weights actually give. So the spring can, of course, be dysfunctional, or the device can be like a little bit not flat, and then you have this unequal tick. We're going to talk about that later in the Eighth Symphony at the end, because in our version, you will hear the result of that. Beethoven is imitating that. He found that very irritating. He sent his metronome a few times to the clockmaker to fix that. But the metronome needs to be super flat, because otherwise you have tick, tick, tick. So it's very
Mm,
irritating. But other than
mm,
that, the speed, the frequency is 0% chance that it has a deviation. And the idea that a composer, any musician would not know how to use it in such a way that he or she would give like ridiculous numbers, then you have to answer me as well, why didn't, and this entire entourage didn't say anything about it.
mm.
They kept it silent, and they republished his works as if nothing was happening. So that's like an argument, Stefan. I'm sorry to be so long. I'm rambling about this, but it's like, this is why is this a point of discussion?
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, and that I wanted to bring it up because it's a lot of times an argument that was it's talked about. It's one of the counter arguments that people bring up for whole beat and all these things, but it's completely ridiculous if you think about it logically. And yeah, I can hear your impatience with that argument because it's just bullshit. Let's be very honest, and that's why. But I wanted to bring it up because then people will also know that it's bullshit.
Yeah, I'm just
And
important.
here is why. It's a lot of these standard arguments that are thrown against Holbeat are just plain and simple bullshit.
Yeah,
One of the other ones is like, yeah, but people actually didn't want you to play according to the speed of metronome marks. Yeah, guess what? In our book, we're going to have 100 fucking quotes telling you that metronome marks were meant as exact tempo indications. Sorry for the F-bomb. Not
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I sometimes would like to be able to use that kind of wording in the book. I mean, but it's true. That, but I understand the argument, Stefan. Like, if in a way, it's easy for you to say that because you know my work of YouTube. You are convinced. You're a mathematician. You look for the logical explanation.
Yeah,
You didn't went through conservatory like 8 years or 5 years or how long, and
good.
just grew up in this sense like I did. I mean, I didn't question them. I was of the same. So I understand why people search for a solution because um, they do not consider the current like way of reading the metronome to be fault or to be like and not credible or not. How do you say that? So
Yeah.
it's a very humanly way of thinking that you do not doubt about the things that you think are like written in stone. But the point where I get a little bit irritated is when musicologists still stick to that point, and we're going to listen to Gardner at the end of this podcast as well. He makes there a statement that these people should know that it doesn't work. So when you study the metronome, like for instance Martin Nordijn did in his thesis on the Beethoven's metronome or tempo indications, you know there are a lot of problems, and you
Mm,
know the solution cannot be in the fact that Beethoven misread his metronome. And to his credit, he doesn't say that. But the consequences of that is like, okay, what's the solution? And then you have a lot of different possibilities, except
mm,
questioning the way we read the metronome today. And for people
mm,
new here, whole beat is just you take the whole metronome like a pendulum.
mm,
You do not say like one, so tick, 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 1, 2, 3. Say 1, tick, 2, 3, 3, tick, and everything is solved. Everything.
yeah.
So yeah, and the book will therefore also start with just like a chapter like why do you not need to read this book? I mean,
Yeah, I still love that chapter. I mean, when we came up with that title, it was just so amazing. But it's true. You don't need to read this book.
and we're going to see in the Maelzel Canon description by Schindler how simple it is.
Yeah.
And let's make the bridge to that, and maybe talk a little bit, Stefan, about how the Maelzel Canon came to us, but also about the figure of Schindler a little bit more. If you don't mind, I would like to bring up like this famous thing of the conversation books.
Hmm.
Because here, yeah, that's the Wikipedia page you see for the people who are listening. That's what we see on screen right now. By the way, you can go for the video podcast, go on Substack and subscribe for it, or on Patreon. There is also the video podcast
Yeah.
there. But what
Then
you
you
see,
can see me waving at the camera at the beginning of every podcast, by
yeah,
the way, guys. So if you want to see that,
you don't want to miss that. I promise you, you don't want that. That's worth your money. But anyway, we're looking at the Wikipedia page just for giving the dates of Schindler. He was a contemporary of Czerny, like and Moscheles. I mean, there was that generation like after Beethoven that was important to him, and so Schindler he worked or he met Beethoven later than he actually himself said. I think it was 1817 that they met for the first time. Again, you can read that here. But he was a violin player. Also studied law. A lot of people studied law. For instance, Schumann as well. That was like, don't think of that time as our time. So they had more studies and was maybe not always that deep as today. But anyways, he was like someone who could help Beethoven organizing his life, and he did that for a few years. Was very close to Beethoven. They broke up like at the end of 1825, and then at the end of 26 or August 26, I mean, it's in this article, they met again, and so also when Beethoven died, Schindler was there. And then, as I said, the most important thing is that Schindler, one of the most important things is that Schindler took with him the 137 conversation books, so little books that Beethoven always carried with him, where he noted down also musical ideas. So it's a gold mine of information, but also conversations when people talked to him, and he didn't hear it, they wrote it down. Sometimes he answered in the book, but oftentimes we don't have his answers there. So you have to guess who's talking, what would Beethoven have replied, and so on. And so what Schindler did for decades was actually trying to figure out how many people, or who were the people that were talking. So he annotated the entire thing. And it's based on that source, so Schindler, that we today still know, like, I don't know how many, but like 75% of the names present in the book, or 60%. Don't quote me on that number. But a lot of people that Schindler said, oh, that must have been that one, that must have been that one, that must have been that one, is because he was just thinking about it or asking people. So he dedicated his life to do that. Also because he wrote the first Beethoven biography in 1840. And don't think about this as a biography in our modern sense. It was like they worshipped the persons that they actually wrote about. And so it's a factual biography, but it is more than that. They were building the figure. That was like the tendency of that time. Not only he was doing that, but that biography was very important. He didn't want to write the first biography. Beethoven had someone else in mind, and he actually pushed for that person to write that biography, but they didn't. And so he did it himself. But the conversation books are important. Why? Because it was the basis on which a certain Stadlen, musicologist in the 70s, actually took his whole legacy down, because he discovered in the biography of Beethoven that was written in the 19th century, like by Alexander, you have the name Alexander Wheelock Thayer, an American who actually went to Europe, learned German in order to write that Beethoven biography, and it's very, very interesting. So just buy it. I think it's reprinted by Dover. It's worth your time reading this. So also Thayer talked to a lot of people like Czerny, but also Schindler. And Thayer writes in this book that Schindler possessed originally more than 400 of these conversation books. And in the early 40s, when this biography was written, the one by Schindler, so 1840, Schindler sold everything to the Berlin library. So they're still there, the conversation books. But there were only 137. And Stadlen makes the conclusion that, okay, but then that means that 200 and how many, 63 or something like that, of these books were destroyed by Schindler. And so, and on top of that, he added also entries in the diaries as if he was there at certain moments where he clearly was not. So Schindler destroyed the legacy of Beethoven. Can you imagine, Stefan? 400 conversation books, only 137 were left, and all the others were thrown away. So to say, to restore or to not give the world a more vulnerable sides of Beethoven. Recently, that's been taken down, this story, like another article by Theodor Albrecht. And Albrecht is a figure I really would like to have on the podcast, because he is one of the, it's immense what he's doing. He is translating the conversation books, which were published in the 1780s, if I'm not mistaken, in German, was already like unbelievable. You have to imagine what these people did. The footnotes of these works are immense. I mean, you have to figure out where Beethoven lived, what he was eating, where he was eating, who he was meeting, and so to combine all the information to get the most of that. So the German effort, like that team, was like unbelievable. But Albrecht is taking that to another level. Like his English translation of the conversation books is unbelievable. But he started in, like, this is an article of 2010 for the people who don't see it. So Anton Schindler as destroyer and forger of Beethoven's conversation books, a case for decriminalization. And this is a super important article, because you will read like what a scholar, if he goes over it factually, not by emotion, not by repeating the things that in the past were said about Schindler, but by facts that Schindler impossibly could have destroyed so many conversation books first, that in the first place, the chance that there were so many, like 400, is like zero, that Beethoven lost a lot of his personal papers on several occasions when he was moving, or he was moving all the time to new apartments, and it's documented. And so his conclusion is there cannot be much more than 137 left after Beethoven's death. And so his assumption is that Thayer, being an American, heard Schindler said something like, "Ich habe viel über 100 of a conversation book." So viel über 100 is more than
a lot more than 100, yeah.
But if you listen to that, viel über 100 is 400, 400. So Thayer might have just missed that. It's that simple. And so this simple fact destroyed almost entire of Beethoven. And that like I don't know every biography, but recent biographies I've seen it, they just keep repeating this over and over. And it's a pity, because also the Maelzel Canon gets buried under this. Because guess what? People who are dealing with tempo reconstruction, like Martin Nortain, for instance, I'm quote him again because he's the source these days, but also Clive Brown and others, Barry Cooper, they never, ever bring the Maelzel Canon up in this context. And I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I sometimes wonder what made them decide not to do that. So, Stefan, maybe we can go to the Maelzel Canon. What do you think about that? Or do you want to have? Did I left some holes in my presentation of Schindler that you want me to talk about like a little more?
No, I think it's an interesting story, and the way you make it. From what I understand now is that, well, the reason that Schindler is taken down and labeled a forger and destroyer of the conversation books is maybe due to a conversation or mistranslation, kind of. So it's like 400 or more than 100, essentially. And yeah, that's the reason that he was taken down as Schindler, I mean. So it's, yeah, that doesn't change anything of the facts that he lived close to Beethoven and all these kinds of things. And it also still remains an interesting source to talk about. But the question is all this really relevant? And you can say, if you look about it completely rationally, it's completely irrelevant when it comes to the source of the Maelzel Canon. But still, I think it's important that we talk about this because, again, Schindler is taken down so much, according to you, in the past biographies and all these kinds of things. So people can discredit the source of the Maelzel Canon quite easily by just saying, yeah, Schindler is just, he's a destroyer, he's a forger, no one cares about him, go away. But in a sense, if you look at it from a distance, it's completely irrelevant to the conversation about the Maelzel Canon that we're going to have in a second. But that's why you wanted to highlight this a little bit and give like a little bit of a different perspective on Schindler as well. And yeah, did I get that correctly?
No, absolutely. And I'm also in my bubble, of course. So that I realize, and I think in general, Schindler is like, I may hope again. I would love to talk to Theodor Albrecht. Maybe you can show like one of the covers of the books that he published recently. If you like this podcast, the beginning of this podcast, and you want to listen to the full episode, go over to Substack. There's a link in the description box. Subscribe to Substack because then you have the full audio version of this podcast. If you want to have the video version, there's also a possibility on Substack to subscribe for $5 per month. Or you can have also the video podcast and support the entire project on our Patreon site. Links to all of these platforms below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We see each other very soon again. Bye.